All right, crew. So this is going to be an ed puzzle lesson where we're going to be starting to read A Long Walk to Water. Now, if you are at home, you don't have a copy of the novel yet, but never fear. Inside of our schedule here, we have some resources that we're going to take care of. So the first thing that I would like you to do is to go to our ELA homepage, which looks like this. And you can look at the classwork. The first thing says to complete your anticipation guide, which is on page 5. This is in your physical packet. If you need a refresher, just click it. This is my copy, so you can't edit this one. This is just showing you that in your packet on page 5, this is what it should look like. All right, page 5 at the very top, it looks like this. What you're going to do is read off each of these, and you are either going to agree or disagree with it. There's no maybe. So you either agree or you disagree. You won't fill out this side until we finish the entire book. So take about 5 minutes now to do this. There's going to be an ed puzzle question that pops up saying, yes, I've done it. And as soon as you click that, we will move on. Use this time now to complete page 5. All right, you should have completed the anticipation guide if you're on this section. So the next thing that it says to do here is to read chapter 1. Now you don't have the book, but on this side here, you can see that there is an online copy and an audio book. So what I'm going to do is play the audio book and track it with the online copy. So just listen to the ed puzzle and you'll be good. Chapter 1, Southern Sudan, 2008. Going was easy. Going, the big plastic container held only air. Tall for her 11 years, Naya could switch the handle from one hand to the other, swing the container by her side, or cradle it in both arms. She could even drag it behind her, bumping it against the ground and raising a tiny cloud of dust with each step. There was little weight going. There was only heat, the sun already baking the air even though it was long before noon. It would take her half the morning if she didn't stop on the way. Heat, time, and thorns. Southern Sudan, 1985. Salva sat cross-legged on the bench. He kept his head turned towards the front, hands folded back perfectly straight. Everything about him was paying attention to the teacher, everything except his eyes and his mind. His eyes kept flicking towards the window through which he could see the road home. Just a little while longer, a few minutes more, and he would be walking on that road. The teacher droned on with the lesson about the Arabic language. Salva spoke the language of his Dinka tribe at home, but in school he learned Arabic, the official language of the Sudanese government far away to the north. 11 years old on his last birthday, Salva was a good student. He already knew the lesson, which was why he was letting his mind wander down the road ahead of his body. Salva was well aware of how lucky he was to be able to go to school. He could not attend the entire year because during the dry season his family moved away from their village. But during the rainy season he could walk to the school, which was only a half hour from his home. Salva's father was a successful man. He owned many head of cattle and worked as their village's judge, an honored, respected position. Salva had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. As each boy reached the age of about 10 years, he was sent off to school. Salva's older brother, Arik and Ring, had gone to school before him last year. It had been Salva's turn. His 2 sisters, Akit and Agneth, did not go to school. Like the other girls in the village, they stayed home and learned from their mother how to keep house. Most of the time, Salva was glad to be able to go on to school, but some days he wished he were still back at home herding cattle. He and his brothers, along with the sons of his father's other wives, would walk with the herds to the water holes where there was good grazing. Their responsibilities depended on how old they were. Salva's younger brother, Kuhl, was taking care of just 1 cow. Like his brothers before him, he would be in charge of more cows every year. Before Salva had even begun going to school, he had helped look after the entire herd and his younger brother as well. The boys had to keep an eye on the cows, but the cows did not really need much care. They left plenty of time to play. Salva and the other boys made cows out of clay. The more cows you made, the richer you were, but they had to be fine, healthy animals. It took time to make a clump of clay look like a good cow. The boys would challenge each other to see who could make the most and best cows. Other times they would practice with their bows and arrows, shooting at small animals or birds. They weren't very good at this yet, but once in a while they got lucky. Those were the best days. When one of them managed to kill a ground squirrel or a rabbit, a guinea hen or a grouse, the boys' aimless played halt, and there was suddenly a lot of work to do. Some of them gathered wood to build a fire. Others helped clean and dress the animal. Then they roasted it on the fire. None of this took place quietly. Salva had his own opinion of how the fire should be built and how long the meat needed to cook, and so did each of the others. The fire needs to be bigger. It won't last long enough, but we need more wood. No, it's big enough already. Quick, turn it over before it's ruined. The juices dripped and sizzled. A delicious smell filled the air. Finally, they couldn't wait 1 second longer. There was only enough for each boy to have a few bites, but oh, how delicious those bites were. Salva swallowed and turned his eyes back towards the teacher. He wished he hadn't recalled those times because the memories made him hungry. Milk. When he got home, he would have a bowl of fresh milk, which would have kept his belly full until supper time. He knew just how it would be. His mother would rise from her work grinding meal and walk around the side of the house that faced the road. She would shade her eyes with one hand, searching for him. From far off, he would see her bright orange headscarf, and he would raise his arm in greeting. By that time he reached the house, she would have gone inside to get his bowl of milk ready for him. Crack! The noise had come from outside. Was it a gunshot or just a car backfiring? The teacher stopped talking for a moment. Every head in the room turned towards the window. Nothing. Silence. The teacher cleared his throat, which drew the boys' attention to the front of the room again. He continued the lesson from where he had left off. Then crack, pop, pop, crack. Gunfire. Everyone down, the teacher shouted. Some of the boys moved at once, ducking their heads and hunching over. Others sat frozen, their eyes and mouths open wide. Salva covered his head with his hands and looked from side to side in panic. The teacher edged his way along the wall to the window. He took a quick peek outside. The gunfire had stopped, but now people were shouting and running. Go quickly, all of you, the teacher said, his voice low and urgent. Into the bush. Do you hear me? Not home. Don't run home. They will be going into the villages. Stay away from the villages. Run into the bush. He went to the door and looked out again. Go, all of you, now. The war had started 2 years earlier. Salva did not understand much about it, but he knew that rebels from the southern part of Sudan, where he and his family lived, were fighting against the government, which was based in the north. Most of the people who lived in the north were Muslim, and the government wanted all of Sudan to become a Muslim country, a place where the beliefs of Islam were followed. But the people in the south were different religions and did not want to be forced to practice Islam. They began fighting for independence from the north. The fighting was scattered all around southern Sudan, and now the war had come to where Salva lived. The boys scrambled to their feet. Some of them were crying. The teacher began hurrying the students out of the door. Salva was near the end of the line. He felt his heart beating so hard that his pulse pounded in his throat and ears. He wanted to shout, I need to go home. I must go home. But the words were blocked by the wild thumping in his throat. When he got to the door, he looked out. Everyone was running. Men, children, women carrying babies. The air was full of dust that had been kicked up by all those running feet. Some of the men were shouting and waving guns. Salva saw all of this with one glance. Then he was running too, running as hard as he could into the bush, away from home. All right, at the bottom of your packet, page 5, you're going to see this. It says, how does the author create a mood of terror and panic at the end of chapter 1? Cite an example of strong word choice that creates terror and panic in the speech bubble, and then explain how it creates the mood. Some of you already have this piece filled in. Some don't. If you don't, then you need to go back into the text and find a piece of text that shows terror and panic. Then on this side, you're going to explain how the author creates that mood. An Ed Puzzle question is going to pop up, and just click yes as soon as you are done with this. I will be checking it tomorrow. All right, on our packet page, the very first packet, or on our schedule, you can see that the homework is that you're reading chapter 2, and then you're doing a character traits activity on page 6 of your packet. You can see the same thing here. So what we're going to do is do the homework right now, so then you don't have to worry about it. Chapter 2, Southern Sudan, 2008. Naya put the container down and sat on the ground. She always tried not to step on the spiky plants that grew along the path, but their thorns littered the ground everywhere. She looked at the bottom of her foot. There it was, a big thorn that had broken off right in the middle of her heel. Naya pushed at the skin around the thorn. Then she picked up another thorn and used it to poke and prod at the first one. She pressed her lips together against the pain. Southern Sudan, 1985. Boom. Salva turned and looked. Behind him, a huge black cloud of smoke rose. Flames darted out of its base. Overhead, a jet plane veered away like a sleek, evil bird. In the smoke and dust, he couldn't see the school building any more. He tripped and almost fell. No more looking back. It slowed him down. Salva lowered his head and ran. He ran until he could not run anymore. Then he walked. For hours until the sun was nearly gone from the sky. Other people were walking too. There were so many of them that they couldn't all be from the school village. They must have come from the whole area. As Salva walked, the same thoughts kept going through his head in rhythm with his steps. Where are we going? Where is my family? When will I see them again? The people stopped walking when it grew too dark to see the path. At first, everyone stood around uncertainly, speaking in tense whispers or silent with fear. Then some of the men gathered and talked for a few moments. One of them called out, "Villages! Group yourself by villages. You will find someone you know." Salva wandered around until he heard the words Lun Arik, the village of Lun Arik here. Relief flooded through him. That was his village. He hurried towards the sound of the voice. A dozen or so people stood in a loose group at the side of the road. Salva scanned their faces. There was no one from his family. He recognized a few people, a woman with a baby, 2 men, a teenage girl, but no one that he knew well. Still, it was comforting to see them. They spent the night right there by the road, the men taking shifts to keep watch. The next morning, they began walking again. Salva stayed in the midst of the crowd with the other villagers from Lun Erik. In the early afternoon, he saw a large group of soldiers up ahead. Word passed through the crowd. It's the rebels who were fighting against the government. Salva passed several rebel soldiers waiting by the side of the road. Each of them held a big gun. Their guns were not pointed at the crowd, but even so, the soldiers seemed fierce and watchful. Some of the rebels then joined the back of the line. Now the villagers were surrounded. What are they going to do to us? Where is my family? Late in the day, the villagers arrived at the rebel camp. The soldiers ordered them to separate into 2 groups, men in one group, women and children, and the elderly in the other. Teenage boys, it seemed, were considered men. Boys who looked to be only a few years older than Salva were joining the men's group. Salva hesitated for a moment. He was only 11, but he was the son of an important family. He was Salva Mawin Dud Erik from the village named for his grandfather. His father always told him to act like a man, to follow the example of his older brothers, and in turn set a good example for Kul. Salva took a few steps towards the men. Hey! A soldier approached Salva and raised his gun. Salva froze. All he could see was the gun's huge barrel, black and gleaming, as it moved towards his face. The end of the barrel touched his chin. Salva felt his knees turn to water. He closed his eyes. If I die now, I will never see my family again. Somehow, this thought strengthened him enough to keep him from collapsing in terror. He took a deep breath and opened his eyes. The soldier was holding the gun with only one hand. He was not aiming it. He was using it to lift Salva's chin so he could get a better look at his face. Over there, the soldier said. He moved the gun and pointed it towards the group of women and children. You are not a man yet. Don't be in such a hurry. He laughed and clapped Salva on the shoulder. Salva scurried over to the women's side. The next morning, the rebels moved on from the camp. The village men were forced to carry supplies, guns and mortars, shells, radio equipment. Salva watched as one man protested that he did not want to go with the rebels. A soldier hit him in the face with the butt of his gun. The man fell to the ground bleeding. After that, no one objected. The men shouldered the heavy equipment and left the camp. Everyone else began walking again. They went in the opposite direction from the rebels, for wherever the rebels went, there was sure to be fighting. Salva stayed with the group from Lun Erik. It was smaller now with the men, and except for the infant, Salva was the only child. That evening, they found a barn in which to spend the night. Salva tossed restlessly in the itchy hay. Where are we going? Where is my family? When will I see them again? It took him a long time to fall asleep. Before he was fully awake, Salvo could feel that something was wrong. He lay very still with his eyes closed, trying to sense what it might be. Finally, he sat up and opened his eyes. No one else was in the barn. Salvo stood so that quickly that for a moment